LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the May 6th edition of LiberalViewer Monday Media Mixup. Thanks for joining me. I picked out the 14 best, most newsworthy clips from the Big Five corporate outlets, the Sunday morning analysis shows on the Big Five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States, for what should be really informative, educational, fair use media criticism and political commentary show for you all today. As you can see from the video title, the main topic I'm covering is possible Trump Vice President Kristi Noem others try out on the Sunday shows, and that's because each of the 5 Sunday shows had a possible Trump Vice President on, and I'm going to show you a clip from all 5. It was Kristi Noem was on CBS, Tim Scott on NBC, Tom Cotton on ABC, Marco Rubio on Fox News, and Doug Burgum on CNN. So 2 governors, 3 senators. By the way, down in the video description, you can see short summaries of all 14 clips I'm going to show you. Kristi Noem got really heavily cross-examined by Margaret Brennan on CBS, which I will show, and Tim Scott got heavily cross-examined by Kristen Kristen Welker, on NBC News' Meet the Press. But also on NBC, I want to start off with some jokes about Kristi Noem. She has gotten a lot of media attention in the last week or so when she included a story in the book she is releasing this week that she shot her 14-month-old puppy named Cricket because it was like too boisterous or untrainable, and then her story's been changing over time. And so, yeah, on Saturday Night Live's Weekend Update, they had some fun with that over here.
Well, it's the first show of spring, so we'll start tonight with puppy murder. In a new book, South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem revealed that she once shot a dog that was untrainable. That's insane. If a dog is untrainable, you don't shoot it, you give it to President Biden. MAGA insiders are saying that Noem, seen here wearing the hair of that dog, now has 0 chance of being Trump's running mate. But I don't know, something tells me Trump would fully support killing disobedient pets.
So there are some good jokes there, but it was in some ways, I don't know why Colin Joe started off saying it was the first show of spring. I mean, spring this year started on March 19th, and there were 3 other episodes of Saturday Night Live after March 19th besides this one. So that set up, I don't know, I guess it was just a joke. That part wasn't really a joke. I guess it was part of a joke. So maybe that's why they said something. Anyway. I'm fact-checking the Weekend Update, which seems kind of a foolish thing to do. But the other thing about that is, they talked about that untrainable dogs get sent to Joe Biden, and, he had problems with his dog Commander. Well, almost stranger or, I don't know, more amusing than what you saw on Weekend Update there, Kristi Noem on Face the Nation actually seemed to suggest that Joe Biden should have shot his dog too. I mean, so much so that Margaret Brennan kind of asked her, and she never answered. Of course, she didn't answer hardly anything. And I'll show you that minute right now.
You have been rumored to be a potential vice presidential candidate, as you know. And former House Speaker Newt Gingrich said killing the dog and then writing about it ended any possibility of her being picked as VP. You talk multiple times about it. In fact, at the end of the book, you say the very first thing you would do if you got to the White House that was different from Joe Biden is you'd make sure Joe Biden's dog was nowhere on the grounds. Commander, say hello to Cricket. Are you doing this to try to look tough? Do you still think that you have a shot at being a VP?
Well, number one, Joe Biden's dog has attacked 24 Secret Service people. So how many people is enough people to be attacked and dangerously hurt before you make a decision on a dog and what to do with it?
Well, he's not living at the White House
That's
anymore.
the question that the president should be held accountable to.
You're saying he should be
That's
shot?
what the president should be accountable to, is what is the number? And I would say about Republicans criticizing me, these are the same Republicans that criticized me during COVID.
And then she went into her talking points. By the way, under sources in the video description, there are links to the sources of all my clips, including the CBS News Face the Nation YouTube channel, where they upload the entire episode and also the entire interview, so you can see the rest of that. I'm not really going to concentrate on the killing your dog and killing the goat cross-examination, which Margaret Brennan actually did cover. It's actually this passage about Kim Jong-un. Here I have like a little screenshot. I actually saw this like before I was listening to Face the Nation. I just saw this on the screen, and I foolishly thought that she was going to get cross-examined on this because she called the kids she worked with as a pastor little tyrants like dictator Kim Jong-un. I thought that was what was going to be controversial about that particular quote, but no. If you hold on to clip 8 after the news summaries, you'll see that the big cross-examination is that she never met Kim Jong-un, although she wouldn't quite admit that. But the cross-examination on that and the killing the dog and the goat was so awesome that the next guest, Senator John Fetterman, started his interview like this.
And we turn now to Pennsylvania Senator John Fetterman. He joins us from Orlando, Florida this morning, where he spent the weekend campaigning on behalf of President Biden's reelection. Welcome to the show, Senator.
Hi.
Hi.
Good to be here.
Great to have you here. You're cracking up. Do you want to tell us what you're responding to there?
Oh, that interview, that was magnificent. No,
Okay. Well, let me ask you about Democrats and your own party. I know you've been.
So yeah, that Senator John Fetterman, he is just not like most of the people in the Senate. He's like much looser, or I don't know. But I found that amusing, so I grouped it in with the political comedy clips there. But the rest of the clips, like I said, the newsmaker clips are going to come after the news summaries. I'm going to show you a clip of each of those 5 possible Trump vice presidents and how they handled the cross-examination, or lack thereof, if you look at Fox News, that they got from the anchors. Marco Rubio was on Fox News, like I said. And anyway, I will get to all that after the news summaries from, well, pretty much from longest to shortest. I think the Fox News Sunday one is like 6 seconds shorter. I don't know how I got them out of order, but this actually has 2 reporters and the host, Shannon Bream. There's the reporter from Tel Aviv, Jeff Paul. Not only are they talking about anti-Israel protests on the college campus, but they talk about the ceasefire talks in Gaza and Biden disagreeing with Netanyahu on Rafah. And there's actually been developments on both those fronts, both the ceasefire talks and what's going on in Rafah, since the Sunday morning shows. And I'll talk about that a little more after we watch what Fox News thought was the important news to put in the news summary, which is pretty different from the other 4 outlets, although a lot of it is newsworthy, although spun, with your typical Fox News bias. And anyway, I'll talk about that a little more, like I said, after we watch the Fox News Sunday news summary, Shannon Bream, and the 2 reporters over here.
Hello from Fox News in Washington. Our top story, anti-Israel protests on campuses across the country. More than 2,300 people have been arrested on at least 52 campuses across 27 states since this started in earnest last month. Police have cleared protesters away at many colleges, including Columbia in New York and the University of Virginia in Charlottesville. And most universities have significantly increased security as they try to prepare for commencement ceremonies. After days of silence, President Biden spoke out Thursday, supporting free speech, but condemning protesters who have caused chaos on campus and used anti-Semitic language. Meanwhile, in Cairo, Hamas representatives are meeting with Egyptian and Qatari mediators on a ceasefire proposal. But back in Israel, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu vows to launch a ground invasion into the southern Gazan city of Rafah, quote, with or without a deal. In a moment, we'll get reaction to all of this from GOP Senator Marco Rubio and Democrat Congressman Jim Himes. But first, Fox team coverage with Jeff Paul in Israel and Lucas Tomlinson at the White House. Lucas, we kick it off with you.
That's right, Shannon. After days of silence about the protests, President Biden addressed the nation from here at the White House. Protests that are expected to continue throughout the summer and into the Democratic National Convention.
Violent protest is not protected. Peaceful protest is.
Biden spoke hours after violence erupted on the campus of UCLA. Members of the president's own party have criticized his handling of the Israel-Hamas war and the protests across the United States. Progressive Democrat Rashida Tlaib, the only Palestinian American in Congress, slammed the police response.
Sending in militarized police forces and even snipers to stop these students for exercising their First Amendment right is truly disgusting.
A bizarre scene at the University of Alabama, where both pro and anti-Israel protesters chanted the same thing. During the 2020 presidential campaign, as protests also raged across the country, Biden pledged to bring people together.
I'm going to bring all these interests together. Peaceful protesters, police chiefs, police officers.
5 blocks from the White House at George Washington University, the statue of the first president remains defaced. After a giant American flag was unfurled, protesters superimposed this image with the words, "Genocide Joe." Biden's former press secretary Jen Psaki will give the commencement address in 2 weeks. Republican lawmakers visited GW, including Byron Donalds.
Everybody believes in peaceful protests, but this is trespassing now.
Critics say the protests have cost Biden support among young voters.
Mr. President, have the protests forced you to reconsider any of the policies with regard to the region?
No. Thank you.
Mr. President.
Right now, President Biden's CIA Director Bill Burns is in Cairo as hostage and ceasefire negotiations continue. Shannon?
All right, Lucas Tomlinson at the White House for us. Lucas, thank you. We turn now to Fox News correspondent Jeff Paul in Tel Aviv. Hello, Jeff.
Well, yeah, Shannon, Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh reportedly said today that he wants to see not only a full withdrawal of Israeli troops, but a comprehensive ceasefire. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu saying that they can't accept that, and if they did, the next October 7th would be only a matter of time. As pressure builds from abroad on Hamas to agree to the latest ceasefire agreement,
there is a very strong proposal on the table right now. Hamas needs to say yes.
In Israel, patience is running thin. Protesters and families of hostages in Tel Aviv once again push their government to act.
Only through returning our loved ones home will the Jewish people be made whole again.
Progress is reportedly being made on the latest deal after a delegation from Hamas landed in Cairo, Egypt this weekend. It could result in both the release of hostages and a pause in the fighting. An agreement would come at a critical time. Israel is preparing its forces for a major ground operation in the southern city of Rafah in Gaza. That's where more than 1 million Palestinians are sheltering from the war.
Aid is not always available, so I can't say we have enough. But me and my family ration what we receive to get by.
As the U.S. continues building a new temporary pier that will eventually help bring more aid into Gaza, during his recent trip to Israel, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said more needs to be done. Blinken, who met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for 2.5 hours, reaffirmed the U.S. cannot support a military operation in Rafah. Netanyahu says it will happen.
Israel will not agree to Hamas's demands, which means surrender, and will continue fighting until all of its goals are achieved.
Now, we are learning a few hours ago there was a mortar attack at the Kerem Shalom crossing, which connects Israel to Gaza. Hamas has claimed responsibility for the attack that injured 7 people, including 1 person who is in critical condition. That crossing, which is critical in getting humanitarian aid into Gaza, is now closed. Shannon?
All right, Jeff Paul reporting for us from Israel. Jeff, thank you. Joining us now, GOP Senator Marco Rubio.
And like I said, I will have a clip of Marco Rubio coming up. That looks like it's clip 13 of 14 if you read the clip summaries down in the video description. That news summary was highly focused on both the protests on college campuses and what's going on in Gaza, the ceasefire talks, and possible incursion into Rafah that have both progressed. There's the Hamas has accepted an Egyptian Qatari offer for a ceasefire or plan for a ceasefire. Now it's up to Israel to see if they will also accept that deal. That was just like breaking news in the last couple hours. And it looks like the Netanyahu government in Israel is starting attacks on Rafah, which is apparently what the Biden administration told them not to do. And I don't know how that's going to intersect with the ceasefire negotiations. If maybe it's I heard some people saying that it's like pressure to get a better deal on the ceasefire, the imminent attack on Rafah. They told like 100,000 people to evacuate, and there's some bombing going on from what I've seen. But other than having that important news at the beginning, it was definitely spun in an anti-Biden way, both in terms of the protests and in terms of Biden's policy on Israel. It was like all kind of spun to maximize the fault of Joe Biden for whatever was bad in the news, which, of course, is one of the purposes of Fox News. And the bias in the next news summary is a bias that all the cable outlets have. It's not a partisan political bias like Fox News has. They have, several different biases: bias towards sensationalism, bias towards both sidism, oversimplification, but they also have a bias towards their exclusive guests and their own polls. Like their polls are like the top news if it's their poll. And I mean, at least in this poll, Biden is beating Trump amongst likely voters, but it's 6 months before the election. And a couple of the news summaries here start with saying it's 6 months before the election. Jon Karl goes into this whole apology for saying this is the most important election, just like we say every year, but this time we've stopped crying wolf. I don't know. I seem to remember that story didn't end very well for the person who had previously cried wolf many times. But anyway, I'll talk about that a little more after we watch what is actually 6 seconds longer. So the longest of the news summaries. Jon Karl and then the ABC political director Rick Klein go like all through the crosstabs or a lot in depth into this poll, which is kind of interesting. Probably not very predictive so far out, but at least Biden's winning, right, over in this clip.
Welcome to This Week. For as long as I've covered politics, politicians have said this will be the most important election of our lifetimes. They said that no matter how high or low the stakes actually were. Election Day 2024 is exactly 6 months from today, and this time the divisions in our country are so vast and the choice so stark, there's little doubt this really is the most important election of our time. No more crying wolf. This is it. We have some news this morning on the state of the race. Rick Klein is here with the new ABC News Ipsos poll. As you look at the numbers, look past the top line. It shows the race essentially tied, but that's not what's most important. If we have learned anything, it's that polls this far out are of limited value in predicting who will win. Our new poll does something else, giving us a stark view of what's on voters' minds and where the campaign is going. Here's what stands out. Trump has a big double-digit advantage on most of the issues that Americans say are most important to them, especially the economy, crime, and the situation at the border. Even on the issue of who will best protect democracy, Biden and Trump are tied. But President Biden has a big double-digit lead over Trump on the issue of character. He is viewed as more honest and trustworthy. And this week, Trump gave voters a lot to consider about both character and respect for democracy. In a lengthy interview with Time magazine, the man who still refuses to accept the results of the last election refused to say whether he would accept the results of this one. And the man who saw his supporters attack the Capitol 3 years ago said there would not be violence this time if he wins, adding, quote, "And if we don't win, you know, it depends. It always depends on the fairness of an election." To be clear, Trump says no violence if he wins. All bets are off if he loses. And you may have missed this. Trump is now calling for the arrest of special counsel Jack Smith. He did this in a post on social media shortly before 11 p.m. Friday night. In a moment, I'll be joined here in the studio by Senator Tom Cotton, a Republican who did accept the results of the last election and who has been mentioned as a possible Trump running mate this time around. But we begin with ABC News political director Rick Klein with the breakdown of our new poll. Well, Rick, it looks incredibly close, and third-party candidates represent an X factor here.
Yeah, John, it is such a close race. You can see in our poll, Donald Trump has a very slight edge over Joe Biden among all adults. But if you hone in just on registered voters or likely voters, you actually get the opposite result and a few-point edge for Joe Biden. But yes, if you add in third-party candidates, 12% of adults overall say they'd vote for Robert F. Kennedy Jr. if he is an option. Now, if he's not an option, and remember, he's not on the ballot everywhere, we're seeing an interesting split develop among Kennedy supporters. 37% of Kennedy supporters say they'd vote for Trump if Kennedy isn't on the ballot. 24% say Joe Biden. So it's not clear what the actual impact will be. But at least initially, it looks like third-party candidates like Kennedy are hurting Trump a bit more than Biden.
So, Rick, we see that Trump has a big advantage on many of the key issues, but a lot of voters aren't thrilled, obviously, with either candidate.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We're starting to see some daylight open up on the issues that are most salient to voters in polls. Immigration, economy, crime and public safety. These are all Trump areas. He's got a significant advantage in trust in handling these issues. The only areas where Biden has an advantage, healthcare and protecting abortion rights. But you're right, about 1 in 5 voters overall on just about all of these issues say they actually don't trust either of the major candidates for president to handle them.
And Biden seems to be struggling with key demographic groups that he would need to win and win big if he stands a chance of being reelected.
John, there is significant softness in the support for Joe Biden among core Democrats. In this poll, he's carrying black voters by 61 points. Well, that sounds like a lot, but he carried them by 84 points back in 2020. Latino voters, a very slight Biden edge in this poll, but it was a 21-point advantage in the exit polls back in 2020. And among younger voters, under 30, we're actually seeing Trump with a slight edge. That was a big win for Biden last time around. It's particularly stark to see that difference among voters of color. Black voters under age 50, far less likely in this poll to say they're supporting Joe Biden than older black voters.
Bottom line, Rick, this is shaping up as an election between two deeply unpopular men.
Yeah, these are dismal numbers for both major party nominees. Joe Biden viewed favorably by only 40% of the country, 33% of the country only. That's a third of people overall have a favorable impression of Donald Trump. And here's a really interesting nugget as we look to see what the potential things could happen to change the course of this race. Among Trump supporters, 20%. That's 1 in 5 say they would reconsider or no longer support Trump at all if he's convicted of a crime in that New York City hush money case. That's a huge, huge chunk in an election that could be as close as this one.
All right, Rick, thank you. And one more note, if you're an undecided voter in the 2024 election, we want to hear from you. Just scan the QR code on your screen right now for more information on how you can make your voice heard in this election. All right, I'm joined now in studio by Republican Senator Tom Cotton.
And Tom Cotton is one of the vice presidential candidates that I took a clip from where he does get some pushback from Jonathan Karl on at least one thing he says. But I think it's down in the video description in the summary of clip 11. We'll be getting to that. But we still have 3 more news summaries. Like I said, I mean, I thought that was an okay news summary, except at least it had the Time magazine story that you'll see in a couple of these other news summaries that didn't really come up over on Fox News Sunday, of course. But you'll see that ABC talked about disturbing statements from Trump, and that'll be in the Meet the Press news summary as well that comes next here. The Meet the Press news summary, instead of focusing for like several minutes on a poll is the most important story, puts in some stuff about Gaza, and you hear about famine in Gaza. Cindy McCain, I'm not taking the Cindy McCain clip from Meet the Press, but down in the video description, there's a link to the full Meet the Press episode, and you can watch Cindy McCain, the wife of the late Senator John McCain from Arizona. She's now the head of the World Food Program, and she said northern Gaza has reached famine levels. That was kind of like breaking news, and Kristen Welker, to her credit, puts it into the news summary in the first few minutes of Meet the Press. Starts with the whole 6 months to the election. I'm not sure if that's news, but also talks about the campus protests and Trump on the campaign trail making more disturbing statements over in this clip.
Good Sunday morning. As we come on the air, Election Day is exactly 6 months away. And dominating the headlines, those campus protests over the war in Gaza. President Biden spoke out about them on Thursday after days of silence, aiming to strike a balance between defending free speech and denouncing violence.
What's going on? We are not an authoritarian nation where we silence people or squash dissent. The American people are heard. In fact, peaceful protest is in the best tradition of how Americans respond to consequential issues. But neither are we a lawless country.
More than 2,000 people have been arrested or detained in the last 2 weeks on campuses across the country as the humanitarian situation in Gaza worsens into what World Food Program Executive Director Cindy McCain told me is now a full-blown famine in the north. Some top Democrats now stepping up their warnings of the potential political price.
I am thinking back, and other people are making this reference, that this may be Biden's Vietnam. I worry very much that President Biden is putting himself in a position where he has alienated not just young people, but a lot of the Democratic base in terms of his views on Israel and this war.
Now, Republicans have tried to use the protests as a political weapon, including former President Trump, who is back on the campaign trail in Michigan and Wisconsin this week for the first time since his criminal trial began nearly 2 weeks ago.
To every college president, I say remove the encampments immediately, vanquish the radicals, and take back our campuses for all of the normal students who want a safe place from which to learn.
Mr. Trump falsely insisted again that he won the state of Wisconsin. He did not. And this week, he would not commit to accepting the 2024 election results. In an interview with Time, Mr. Trump also said he would consider pardoning every one of the more than 800 people who've been sentenced for their roles in the January 6th Capitol insurrection, many of whom have pleaded guilty. And he wouldn't rule out political violence if he loses. Quote, "If we don't win, it depends. It always depends on the fairness of an election." This weekend, Republican donors and potential running mates gathered at a donor retreat at Mr. Trump's private club in Palm Beach. NBC News has obtained audio of the closed-door event where Mr. Trump railed against prosecutors and baselessly accused President Biden's administration of orchestrating the indictments against him, saying, quote, "These people are running a Gestapo administration, and it's the only thing they have." Meanwhile, earlier this week, Trump said the search for a running mate is still in its early stages.
Usually it's done right around the convention. So it's going to be done, and maybe it'll be done before you, because here we are in Wisconsin. We'll be making that decision, I think, closer to Wisconsin time, if you want to know the truth. It's very early right now.
Among those under consideration to be former President Trump's running mate, South Carolina Senator Tim Scott, who joins me now.
And I will have a clip of Tim Scott coming up. I thought that was a good news summary, and like the ABC one before it and the CNN one after it, the actual news organizations all mentioned the disturbing Trump statements. The Time magazine or the Mar-a-Lago event, NBC actually got the audio there of, like, I wonder if it was Marjorie Taylor Greene there, and when he called Biden Gestapo state. She said, I think that's gazpacho, right? Didn't she have like the whole gazpacho police or whatever? That was one of her famous mistakes. So I don't know if that happened, but I guess NBC has the audio, so they know. And then you have a shorter version here from CNN State of the Union, Jake Tapper talking about the Mar-a-Lago event, Trump's disturbing statements as he vets possible vice presidential candidates, and after a week of being a defendant in New York criminal trial over here.
Hello, I'm Jake Tapper in Washington, where the state of our union is auditioning. Out of court for the weekend, Donald Trump was back in his element, fueling speculation over who he might choose to be his number two. Yesterday at a donor retreat at Mar-a-Lago, Mr. Trump called half a dozen vice presidential hopefuls up on stage and openly discussed whether one of them might join him on the ticket. In his remarks to top donors, Mr. Trump also continued to lie about the 2020 election. He vented about special counsel Jack Smith and the other lawyers prosecuting him, and he referred to his Democratic opponent Joe Biden as, quote, running a Gestapo administration, unquote. He also said, according to the New York Times, quote, when you are a Democrat, you start off essentially at 40% because you have civil service, you have the unions, and you have the welfare. And don't underestimate welfare. They get welfare to vote, unquote. Quite a turnaround from on Friday when Trump was a criminal defendant compelled to sit in a New York courtroom, fined by a judge for violating a gag order and forced to listen as a former top aide, Hope Hicks, described his private reaction to that infamous Access Hollywood tape released in October 2016. Joining me now is one of the vice presidential contenders on stage at Mar-a-Lago this weekend, North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum.
And I will have a clip of North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum. We have all the Dakotas because I'm also about to get to the Kristi Noem interview and a massive cross-examination on the visit with Kim Jong-un that never happened. Doug Burgum is kind of more boring, but also an okay cross-examination from Jake Tapper on Trump's statements about, well, I'll get to that. When I get to that, you can see the summaries of the clips down in the video description. That is clip 12. But before I get to that, I guess there is one more news summary, except there's no news in it. Margaret Brennan just says hello and then goes to Kristi Noem, their guest. Although, to be fair, later in the program, Mark Strassman does a report on campus protests and the Gaza issue. You can see that down at a link in the video description under sources if you go to the Face the Nation YouTube channel. So they just put that later in the program. Instead, I guess they didn't want to put any news before the massive, magnificent interview that Senator John Fetterman referred to. So here's all Margaret Brennan's beginning right here.
Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. We begin this morning with the Republican governor of the state of South Dakota, Kristi Noem.
So yeah, that was it. But that wasn't it in terms of Margaret Brennan doing a pretty masterful job of showing Governor Kristi Noem as evasive. Like I said, she did do the whole shooting the dog issue and shooting the goat. But I was surprised to learn about this whole fake visit with Kim Jong-un, and Margaret Brennan, even though never gets her to admit that she didn't meet with him, just that it was inappropriate to have that. And she's like, was it some sort of like secret thing? But it seems like, and then she talks about how she did go to North Korea because she like went to the demilitarized zone. But it sounds like, and there's some really good follow-up questions. I especially like the one about the audiobook, and I'll talk about all of it a little more after we watch this magnificent interview, or part of it, of Kristi Noem. That's what John Fetterman called it, and I will call it magnificent as well. You can let me know whether you think it's that magnificent from this 5-minute 49 excerpt on the infamous visit with Kim Jong-un over here.
So you write about lessons learned in leadership, and you bring up some specific incidents I want to ask you about. You talk about meeting some world leaders, and one specific one, quote, "I remember when I met with North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un, I'm sure he underestimated me, having no clue about my experience staring down little tyrants. I've been a children's pastor after all." Did you meet Kim Jong-un?
Well, you know, as soon as this was brought to my attention, I certainly made some changes and looked at this passage. And I've met with many, many world leaders. I've traveled around the world. As soon as it was brought to my attention, we went forward and have made some edits. So I'm glad that this book is being released in a couple of days, and that those edits will be in place, and that people will have the updated version.
So you did not meet with Kim Jong-un. That's what you're saying.
No, I've met with many, many world leaders. I've traveled around the world. I think I've talked extensively in this book about my time serving in Congress, my time as governor, before governor, some of the travels that I've had. I'm not going to talk about my specific meetings with world leaders. I'm just not going to do that. This anecdote shouldn't have been in the book, and as soon as it was brought to my attention, I made sure that that was adjusted. So the book is not released until Tuesday, and so we're doing all that we can to make sure that those changes are made, and I'm going to continue to focus on what this book is and the blueprint that it lays out for the American citizen, on all of the things in the background and stories of my life, but also what I think that needs to be identified in politics and what's broken today. I talk about how broken the money game is, how broken it is that we've got consultants that are getting rich off of elected officials, and then how fake some elected politicians are. Every single person in this country wants someone in elected office that's a human being, that doesn't say they're perfect. I take responsibility for that being in the book, and as soon as it was brought to my attention, I asked for it to be changed. So I'm glad that the release date is in a couple of days, and we're excited to talk to America about my new book, No Going Back.
So you talk about your time in the Armed Services Committee from 2013 to 2015. In that period of time, the leader of South Korea was a female president. I'm wondering, who is it that you confused Kim Jong-un with?
Oh, I think you need to remember, Margaret, and everybody needs to remember that I've worked on ag policy and federal policy for over 30 years. My time in serving and making policies in this country has been extensive and covered decades.
Right, but you never went to North Korea. I make no
specifics in this book. I talk about the fact that, yes, I have. I've been there. So
you went to North Korea?
You went to the DMZ, and there are details in this book that talk about going to the DMZ and specifics that I'm willing to share. There's some specifics I'm not willing to share with you. I've traveled the world, and I visited with world leaders, and some of that is referenced in the book, and this anecdote is something that, when it was brought to my attention, we made some changes, and when the book's released, we'll do all that we can to see that is reflected.
Okay. Well, I'm asking about that specifically because you made the point to bring him up twice, and that he was a little tyrant.
Do you have a question for me, Margaret?
Yes, I do. South Korea is a treaty ally. North Korea is a nuclear-armed adversary. So that's a pretty big thing to confuse. I know you read this book before it was published because you released video of your recording of the audiobook. You didn't catch these errors when you were recording it?
Oh, Margaret, as soon as it was brought to my attention, I took action to make sure that it was reflected. And listen, this is what is so discouraging about politics and the media today, is that we have the White House that just recently came out and confirmed that President Joe Biden has misspoken, has made mistakes, has even outright lied over close to 150 times just this year, and you've done nothing to question him on any of that. And you're talking about a book that hasn't been released yet, that's been corrected before it's been released, and you haven't said one thing about Joe Biden saying that he was in prison with Nelson Mandela, that he started the civil rights movement. That
if I had an interview with Joe Biden, who I've asked for multiple times, I will definitely ask him about his record, but I'm asking you about your book here, which we have.
I'm just asking for why am I being treated differently than every other person that you've interviewed? I've looked at your last several weeks of your interviews. You don't You don't interrupt other people. You let them talk. Thank you for inviting me to have this conversation about this book. This book is extremely important to the people of this country. It is important because it's a how-to guide of what they can do to have input into their government, how we need breakers and builders in this world. And I'm taking responsibility for the change that we've made.
And for the mistake in the book.
And I've told you that, and I'm no, it's not. What I've said is that I have
You're
decided
not taking responsibility for the mistakes in the book.
I've decided this, and I'm saying that this book is very, very good, and I've met with many world leaders, and that there are world leaders that I've met with that are in this book. There are many that I've met with that are not in this book. And this is an anecdote that I asked to have removed because I think it's appropriate at this point in time. But I'm not going to talk to you about those personal meetings that I've had with world leaders. I'm just not going to have that conversation because I think it's important.
You do mention Benjamin Netanyahu as well.
So yeah, at that point, Margaret Brennan gives up, which, I don't know, I thought some of those follow-up questions, I liked the audio. You didn't catch it during the audio recording, and but she never even admitted not meeting Kim Jong-un, just that it was an inappropriate anecdote that she had removed when it was brought to her attention or whatever. She can really stick to those talking points, I guess. And if you want to see the whole killing the dog and killing the goat cross-examination and what she says about Netanyahu, like I said, down in the video description under sources, you can find the entire episode and the entire interview on the Face the Nation YouTube channel. The next cross-examination is pretty much as valiant. It's not quite as long. It's Kristen Welker on NBC News' Meet the Press, trying to get Tim Scott to say he'll accept the results of the 2024 election, starting with something Trump said about, asking him about Trump saying he won't accept the results. And then Tim Scott himself, I think it's like 6 times maybe he refuses. We can count as we watch this next cross-examination of another possible Trump Vice President, Senator Tim Scott, over here.
All right, well, let's talk about some of the headlines this week. In an interview, Mr. Trump this week again would not commit to accepting the election results of 2024 if he loses. He still hasn't conceded the last election. You, of course, did vote to certify the 2020 election results, and you've said, quote, it was not stolen. Why would you join a ticket with someone who believes the exact opposite on this critical point?
Well, I think we have to listen to what President Trump said and not what the reporters said that he actually said. Here's one of the things that he's been very clear, and even talking about the situation in Wisconsin, what he said was he expects there to be an honest election. He expects the results to be clear and for him to be successful. I expect him to be successful as well. There's no doubt that when you look at the polls across our country, the one thing that is crystal clear, that the American people now having a contrast between 4 years of Joe Biden versus 4 years of Donald Trump, they're really excited to get back to the Trump years. And so I expect the election to be fair, and I expect Donald Trump to be our next president.
In terms of what he said, he specifically said, if it's not fair, as you're saying, you have to fight for the right of the country. And just this week, he said that he won Wisconsin. Falsely, Senator. So again, to the point, you voted to certify the election results of 2020. It's the exact opposite of what you said and did after 2020. Why would you want to be on a ticket with someone where there's such a fundamental difference?
There is clear facts here. President Trump himself said he expects this election to be fair, he expects it to be honest, and he expects to win. That's what the presidential candidate should expect, and I expect the exact same thing. And frankly, the American people agree with him. This is an issue that is not an issue, so I'm not going to make it an issue.
Well, Senator, will you commit to accepting the election results of 2024? Bottom line.
Well, at the end of the day, the 47th president of the United States will be President Donald Trump, and I'm excited to get back to low inflation, low unemployment.
Wait, Senator, yes or no? Yes or no? Will you accept the election results of 2024 no matter who wins?
That is my statement.
But is it just yes or no? Will you accept the election results of 2024?
I look forward to President Trump being the 47th president. Kristen, you could ask him multiple times.
Senator, just a yes or no answer.
So the American people will make the decision.
But I don't hear you committing
for President Trump. That's clear.
I don't hear you committing to the election results.
Here's the challenge.
Will you commit to accepting the election results?
This is why so many Americans believe that NBC is an extension of the Democrat Party. At the end of the day, I've said what I've said, and I know that the American people, their voices will be heard, and I believe that President Trump will be our next president. It's that simple.
But, Senators, you know, the hallmark of our democracy is that both candidates agree to a peaceful transfer of power. So I'm asking you, as a potential VP nominee, will you accept to commit to the election results in this election cycle, no matter who wins? Just simply yes or no.
I expect President Trump to win the next election. Listen, I'm not going to answer your hypothetical question when, in fact, I believe the American people are speaking today on the results of the election. And if it continues for the next 6 months, we find ourselves in a great position where we get back to another century of American prosperity. Yeah. I'm looking forward to that.
All right. Let me ask you about the issue of abortion.
So, yeah, that's where Kristen Welker gives up on, I think, at least 6 times. Tim Scott there refused to say he himself would accept. It was like, I expect Donald Trump to be the 47th president. That was his, that's my statement. Was like one time he just tried to say, that's my statement. So I don't know, who's the winner there? The politician that sticks to his talking points of not answering a certain question, or the journalist who exposes it by making him say it 6 times? I don't know. Is that the magic number? How many times? I don't know. Well, you can juxtapose it to Margaret Brennan and Kristi Noem. That's kind of why I put those 2 clips together. And then Jonathan Karl, I think, is like much slower on this. He's like has Senator Tom Cotton on, and he's like answering another question, and he like spontaneously starts referring to the campus protests, the pro-Palestinian protests on a bunch of college campuses, as little Gazas. And Jonathan Karl starts off like just asking his prepared question about the campus protests, and then eventually, like after he does it like 3 times, he like pushes back on it a little bit. And Tom Cotton is also in the running to be Trump's vice president, Senator Tom Cotton from Missouri. And this is like in between. It's the length of the last 2. I think it's a little bit softer cross-examination, but you can let me know. But then he like builds at the end. So I don't know, there's kind of a comeback at the end. He's slow to anger, Jonathan Karl, but he comes in with the facts at the end, I guess, and mentions the famine in Gaza that you saw in the NBC news summary. So Jonathan Karl gets the famine in Gaza into his cross-examination of the Little Gaza phenomenon from Tom Cotton. It starts with Tom Cotton first bringing it up at the end of an answer to a different question over here.
The Democrats, though, they have deep philosophical divisions on Israel. That's why you see all these little Gazas out there on campuses where you have people chanting vile anti-Semitic rhetoric. That is not something that's going to go away.
Well, let me ask you about that. We saw President Biden come out. I mean, I'm sure you think it was too late, but he did come out and he clearly condemned the violence. He's condemned the anti-Semitism. I assume you agree with what he did, even if it was too late.
So no, I think you're mischaracterizing what he did. Yes, it was absolutely too late. It was 2 weeks after these pro-Hamas fanatics had taken over a lot of campuses and set up these little Gazas. Second, he didn't specifically speak to what they're saying and what they're doing. They're chanting final solution or telling Jews to go back to where they came from. They're spray painting buildings with vile anti-Semitic hate. He said, well, we shouldn't have anti-Semitism or hate speech in the abstract or Islamophobia. Where are the encampments, John, on campuses spreading Islamophobia? Why is Joe Biden so equivocal? Why does he have to draw moral equivalence between thousands of students who are setting up these little Gazas all across America, engaged in hate speech against Jews, assaulting Jews, disobeying the law, and some fictional encampment that's spreading Islamophobia.
Can I ask you just 3 or 4 times now just used the phrase little Gazas. What do you mean by that?
Well, they call themselves the Gaza Solidarity Encampment. They're little Gazas.
I mean, are you... It seems like you're mocking the situation in Gaza.
Well, a lot of these people do deserve to be mocked.
Well, no, Gaza. I'm talking about, Gaza right now.
College campuses.
We had the World Food Program has just now said that there is an outright famine in parts of Gaza. Tens of thousands of people have died. I mean, you're using this phrase "little Gazas,"
which is 100% the fault of Hamas. Just like every civilian casualty in Gaza is 100% the fault of Hamas. Yet Joe Biden, for 7 months, has leaned on Israel, has pressured Benjamin Netanyahu, has told them to stand down when they get attacked by Iran, has said that they can't go into the last holdout where Hamas has its final terrorist battalions. But no, these students on campuses, they deserve our contempt. They also deserve our mockery. I mean, they're out there in their N95 masks in the open air with their gluten allergies, demanding that Uber Eats get delivered to them. They should not have been allowed to fester on campus for 2 weeks when these liberal administrators and liberal politicians refused to send in the police to clear them out the very first day they set up their tents.
I mean, look, it's clear there's been some vile stuff going on in some of these protests. It's also clear that there are some people exercising their right to protest.
You can protest.
I assume we can agree that that's okay.
You can protest all you want. If you want to make a fool of yourself and support a terrorist group, you can do that. Now, if you're a foreigner, you can't. And where's Joe Biden's administration demanding that universities turn over the names of any foreign students here on a visa, revoking those visas and deporting them? That's something that Joe Biden can do today. But you are not allowed to violate campus rules and policies and break the law. Where were the liberal administrators and liberal politicians sending in the police on the very first day? We should not have tolerated this for a moment. I mean, you have Jewish students who have been assaulted on campus. Jewish students have been told it's not safe for you to come. Go back home. Just blocks from here, John, you have one of the biggest little Gazas left at George Washington University. Yesterday, they called for a guillotine for the beheading of university administrators. Is that nonviolent? They deface.
No, I mean, like I said, there's no doubt there's plenty of vile stuff. There's lots of vile things going on. There's no doubt there's also some people legitimately
underneath it all? What's underneath it is anti-Semitic and it's anti-Israeli. But what's underneath it all, John, what's underneath it all is a hatred for this country. That's why you find flyers once they get cleared out that says "Death to America." And while just blocks from where we sit right now, these fanatics have defaced a statue of George Washington. They spray painted it, calling him a genocidal warmonger. They put a terrorist headdress on George Washington.
That's indefensible. But let me move on to.
But that's the kind of thing that Joe Biden and the Democrats are tolerating. You made your views
abundantly clear. But let me move on to 2024. You've been mentioned as a possible Trump running mate. Is that talk real?
Well, first off, John, what we're talking about is 2024.
Okay.
The reason why Donald Trump, one of the many reasons why Donald Trump is going to win this election, is you've got Democratic protesters out there putting a terrorist headdress on a statue of George Washington.
I mean, I don't know who's the Democrat. A lot of these people are very upset with Joe Biden.
Meanwhile,
but about you, are you? Is that real? This talk
you have
a running mate?
Patriots like these frat boys at UNC and around the country who are defending the American flag, and Joe Biden refused for 2 weeks to come out and denounce it. That is the 2024 election. Now, as far as your question is concerned, I know that you and everyone else loves to speculate in this part of the game about who's going to be vice president, who's going to be in the cabinet.
And whatever, he goes on not to answer that question. Actually, watching that clip again, there was some good parts there from Jonathan Karl in the middle, but a lot of times I think he agreed too much. I mean, he did point out protesters have right of free speech, but he also didn't really push back that much when Senator Tom Cotton was trying to smear like thousands of people with like what one person said maybe. And a lot of it is kind of drummed up. I watch it on Fox News all the time. And at least he did, well, I do like the fact that Jonathan Karl, about halfway through that clip, told Senator Tom Cotton that he was like mocking the victims of a famine, which he kind of was there with his little Gaza thing, but he made clear he was mocking the liberal, whatever, liberal Democratic professors and students and gluten allergy. And I don't know, there were so many like buzzwords there. I don't know, compared with Kristi Noem and Tim Scott. You think Tom Cotton won the buzzword Olympics trying to be Trump's vice president? I think Jonathan Karl's cross-examination was not as good as the previous two, and I don't know, Senator Tom Cotton, though, he's just I don't think he is very charismatic. I think he puts a lot of people off. He seems kind of evil. I mean, just in terms of his affect, the angry and I don't know. I think Trump's running mate might have to be a little softer. I mean, both Kristi Noem and Tim Scott have a way of, a slightly Reagan-esque way of putting a soft coat on, right-wing extremism or whatever. But Tom Cotton, there's no no coating on there. Now, the next guy, he's just kind of boring, and he gets pretty well cross-examined by Jake Tapper on CNN's State of the Union about Trump's recent refusal. No, this is Trump's comments that there might be violence if he loses the election in 2024. And Doug Burgum, he tries to wiggle out of that, but you can compare it to the previous three and tell me what you think over in...
Something else Donald Trump said in an interview with the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel and also with Time Magazine. He's refusing to commit to accepting the results of the 2024 election. He told the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, quote, "If everything's honest, I'll gladly accept the results. I don't change on that. If it's not, you have to fight for the right of the country," echoing language he used on January 6th. When Time Magazine asked him about potential violence if he loses, he said, quote, "If we don't win, it depends." Now, you called the violence on January 6th reprehensible, and you said it does not represent American values. Donald Trump is openly discussing right now pardoning all of the January 6th criminals. I think that you heard a song from them last night at the fundraiser. And those criminals, by the way, include those who have been convicted in an American court of violently attacking police. He's talking about pardoning them, and he seems to be leaving the door open to potential violence if he loses again. Based on comments you've made in the past, that must concern you.
Well, I think the bigger context here, Jake, is really about elections in America. I mean, you go back in my lifetime, when 1960, it came down to one county. We talk about an election like it's one thing in our country, but elections are still run at the state, the county, and the precinct level. And in Cook County, it was very close between Kennedy and Nixon conceded. In 2000, they've made movies about it, and that election was contested for 2 months in the courts afterwards. And it was, came down to Broward County and some hanging chads. In 2016, this network and many others challenged the results of the 26, falsely claiming that there was Russian interference.
We never challenged the results of the election.
Well, there's plenty of stories supporting that.
I'm talking about the violent insurrection that you yourself have decried.
Yes, well, I'm looking forward to next January when Vice President Harris certifies the election for Donald Trump. I mean, the American people are the ones that get to decide these elections, but for both parties and for all Americans, we've got to make sure that every county, every precinct is beyond reproach, that everybody can be confident in our country. In North Dakota, we're doing that. Nobody's questioning the results of an election in any county or precinct in North Dakota. It can be done. It's done all over the nation, except in some cases, we've got, we could have a handful of counties that this election could turn on again, and we've just got to make sure that when it's done, both sides feel good about how it was counted.
Do you believe Joe Biden won the 2020 election?
I believe that Joe Biden won the 2020 election, but I also, based on the number of votes that were in, but I think that because of COVID, there was a huge number of irregularities because we changed a bunch of rules in certain places, in certain precincts, in certain states. And the number of mail-out ballots, not mail-in. We do absentee ballots in North Dakota. We make sure we're verifying signatures. But when you're mailing out more ballots than there are people that are actually on the registers for the voting rolls, that creates a massive moral hazard. And then when you've got unmonitored drop boxes and a bunch of single bullet votes that only vote for one candidate, I think all of us have to say, is that the way we want to have elections?
I don't know what you're talking about.
So I think that 2020 was a special case.
I mean, you agree with
a single bullet vote is a ballot that comes in where it's very unusual to get that many ballots where someone just votes for president and not for anybody else down ballot. That's what I'm talking about.
Attorney General Bill Attorney General Bill Barr said that there was no significant fraud that would have changed the results of the 2020 election. Do you disagree with that, or do you agree with that?
Well, again, we're talking about, what are you talking about? What happened before the ballots came in or after they came out?
About
if
the
you say,
results
hey,
of the
we counted up all the
election.
ballots and this. Yeah, and I'm saying, I just said it. I think that there was a special set of circumstances around COVID where we did things like we've never done before. The millions of mail-out ballots was a new thing for America. And when you mail out more ballots and they just go out to, I mean, I know people in states where they got 3 ballots mailed to them. That's a problem, and we should all be concerned about that. But I'm looking forward. We're talking about making sure that the 2024 election is secure, and there's no need to keep relitigating 2020. We got to talk about the policies that are going to help people understand. And again, how do we make America safe? How do we get our economy strong again? How do we secure our borders? President Trump is going to do all those things, and this is a unique point in history because we haven't, since Grover Cleveland, we haven't had a former president running against a current president. So Americans have got a better chance than ever to say, was I better off under President Trump than I am under Biden? And the answer for the majority of people is that they were better off under President Trump.
So just quickly, if you could, if President Trump asks you to serve as his vice president, will you say yes?
And of course, there's not a yes or no answer to that question. But you can see the whole CNN State of the Union down in the video description. I just kept the clip running so you could see that Jake Tapper kind of gave up on his cross-examination after, well, that was a 5-minute clip, so he was pretty persistent on whether, but he also did not really get an answer. You can tell me what you think of that compared to the other 3 of the actual journalistic outlets that did some job of cross-examining these potential vice presidential candidates. The last presidential candidate I'm going to show you, vice presidential candidate, sorry. Did I say presidential when I meant vice? Sorry, these are all vice presidential candidates that Trump is considering. He has a longer list, and I think in one of the news summaries they showed him saying, he's going to decide that closer to Wisconsin, which is where the Republican convention is going to be in Milwaukee this summer. And so he had a whole bunch of them to Mar-a-Lago, including Marco Rubio, the final vice presidential candidate. I'm going to show you a clip from, except he was on Fox News Sunday with Shannon Bream, so he did not really get cross-examined. I mean, he still got to show his ability to give the Republican talking points. But I mean, listen to this question that Marco Rubio gets asked. This is the only part where she mentions abortion. And the question is actually, how worried is he about the abortion issue being on the Florida ballot as motivating the base, whatever, never really even asks him about his position on an abortion. And he immediately turns it around anyway on why aren't you asking the Democrats about their position on abortion, which of course Shannon Bream always does, and does not get any kind of cross-examination from Shannon Bream at all. Luckily, she has Democratic Senator Jim Hines on afterwards to tell her how she should have cross-examined Senator Marco Rubio. So I'm going to show those 2 clips together as my final newsmaker clips before the bonus Cheech and Chong the kitten clip. I don't know where they went. I think they're still in their naps or something, but they haven't been in the room here. But I do have some cute seconds from earlier today to show you after Marco Rubio and then Jim Hines. First, Marco Rubio gets the softball question and I guess hits it out of the park for Marco Rubio. You can let me know what you think. it is definitely a softball over here.
The issue of abortion has been a very difficult one for Republicans. You seem to be of the mindset that you need to embrace it and try to control the conversation in a better way and actually talk about it, not run from it. Democrats, though, feel like it's a great case to make against you. Here's the vice president in Florida days ago when the 6-week ban in Florida went into effect.
Since Roe was overturned, every time reproductive freedom has been on the ballot, the people of America voted for freedom.
Now, the Florida Supreme Court has said an abortion measure can be on the Florida ballot there in November. How worried are you about that motivating the base?
Well, what I'm more worried about is that no one ever asked the vice president, Kamala Harris, or any Democrat, what restrictions do they support? Which abortion should not be allowed? They never tell you. Should someone be allowed to do an abortion on the day of birth? After birth? 9 months? Should past the point of viability? Well, they will never tell you which abortions should not be allowed. Okay, they're always demanding to know what exceptions do you support, but they never tell you which restrictions they would support. They are extremists. They believe abortion should be allowed at any time for any reason, basically, and paid for by taxpayers. No one ever asked Kamala Harris that. No one ever asked the Democrats that. So someone should start asking them what their position is on that, and then we can sort of define and decide. All right, what are the policy options here? I've never viewed abortion as a political issue. I believe it is a moral issue. It is the conflict between two rights, a woman's right to choose and an unborn human being's right to live. And I err on the side of life because without life, none of the other rights matter. There's no right to speech. There's no right to vote. There's no right to do anything if you're not alive. And we have to have laws that define how we protect human life. But these people will never tell you what abortion should not be allowed. They are extremists. They are radical extremists. And it is journalistic malpractice for Kamala Harris to repeatedly be allowed to do interviews and never be asked, Kamala Harris, what abortions should not be allowed in America? At which point is it too far and too bad? Never answers that. Never. She's an extremist. They're extremists.
Well, I will say for Democrats who are willing to come on the show and we do have that conversation with them. And I agree with you. It seems like they also have failed to coalesce around a message for where their limits are in many cases. Before you go, though, you're in Florida. You're spending.
And then she asked him if he'll move out of Florida so that he can be on the ballot with Trump. You know, the president and vice president can't both get electoral votes from the same state. And Florida has a lot of electoral votes. So if Marco Rubio wanted to be Trump's running mate, and it's a close electoral vote, then one of them has to move out of state. They can't both be from Florida. And he, of course, doesn't answer that question, but that was a softball question, and the follow-up was, I agree with you, and I ask Democrats when they're willing to come on the show. And it's a stupid question because, as Jim Hines points out, pretty clearly, there aren't that many late-term abortions anyway, and they're usually the limits that Democrats are fighting for are the Roe v. Wade limits, which means that you have a right to elective abortion up until viability, which is like 24 weeks, or after that, states can regulate abortion, but they have to, the Democratic position is that it should be medical necessity. The life or health of the mother is the only reason that people should have abortions after viability. And that's basically what happens. There's only like 1.3% of the 800,000 or 900,000 abortions that the Guttmacher Institute, that's Shannon Bream has the figures already here. Like there are thousands of these late-term abortions after 21 weeks. It's like 1.3% of 860,000 abortions on the Guttmacher site that she's, but that is like 8,000 out of 800,000 or whatever, but that's how many are done for medical necessity, life and health of the mother. People don't really decide to do abortions that late. And Jim Hines shows like spontaneously in the middle of an answer about the campus protests in Gaza, schools Shannon Bream on how she should have cross-examined Marco Rubio in the previous clip, in the final newsmaker clip that I will talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
And Shannon, if you'll give me just 1 minute, I work very closely with Marco Rubio. We're both on the Gang of Eight. I don't know that I've ever seen him quite as over-caffeinated this morning, but he said that you never asked Democrats on the topic of abortion where they should be. Baloney, malarkey. Shannon, as you know, prior to the Dobbs decision in the Supreme Court, Democrats and most of America supported the concept of Roe v. Wade, and the concept was that you could have an abortion up to the point of viability, and states could decide, what that was. And so, again, I'm not quite sure if Marco just had too much coffee this morning, but
I would say,
the notion that we're extremists on this topic is just madness.
But I have asked a number of Democrats, because there are multiple states in this country that do allow abortion until a due date. That's factual. And I've asked Democrats whether they're okay with that, and many of them have had a very hard time answering that question for me.
Yeah, but Shannon, here's the thing, right? If an abortion occurs prior to natural birth, it doesn't occur because mom says, oh, I changed my mind. It occurs because there is the absolute rarest of medical events that puts the life of the mother in danger or the life of the child in danger. To have Marco Rubio go on national television and say that Democrats are extremists that believe you should be able to kill a child frankly, that's what's wrong with our politics. And you know that, and I know that. Again, those situations where a mother has carried a baby to term and something happens in the last week, that is the most horrendous of situations. And if a doctor says you're going to die if you deliver that, that is the most horrendous and personal of situations. But it's also vanishingly rare. And I know, based on what the people of Kansas did in their plebiscite about abortion, that in this country, most Americans believe, as most Democrats believe, that this is a decision up to the point of viability that should be made by a woman and her doctor, not by a bunch of guys wearing ties and suits in national legislatures.
Well, I will say the Guttmacher Institute, which has been aligned with Planned Parenthood, so clearly not a pro-life organization, they document this and say there are actually thousands of late-term abortions, third trimester abortions every year. And so people do have to have a conversation about the fact that that does happen.
Yeah, that's right. Most of those late abortions are medically related. I mean, if the idea is that there are women out there who carry a child for 7 months, and needless to say, I have not carried a child, but if you've carried a child for 7 or 8 months, and the idea is that lots of women then say, oh, guess what? I don't want to do this. That's just not what happens. And okay, I haven't actually looked at the Guttmacher numbers. Thousands. Shannon, as you know, this is a country of some 330, 340 million people. So again, all I'm saying is that, for Marco Rubio to say that nobody ever asks people, Democrats in particular, where they are on abortion, nonsense. Democrats are generally where the American people are, which is where the world was before the Dobbs decision, that until the point of viability, this is a decision to be made between a woman and her doctor.
Well, we'll see, because states are now hammering this out. There is a patchwork that is very, very diverse across this country. But let me get back to the Middle East, because
Yeah, let me get back to the Middle East, although that was weird. She had those Guttmacher numbers, which like I said, I looked up. It's 1.3% after 21 weeks, because that's the third trimester. That's the number that they put up on the graph for, I think, the numbers from, was it 2017? I can't remember the exact year, but I went and looked it up, and it was 1.3% after 21 weeks of like 860,000 annual abortions that year. So I guess that does mean they're like, but it's some of those are before viability, because viability is 24 weeks. And I think there is an easy answer for Democrats as to their Roe v. Wade position, is that pre-viability, pre-24 weeks, elective abortion, and after 24 weeks, medical necessity. And that's pretty much what Jim Himes was saying there. Although I did notice during that interview that I had, like early on in this live stream, I said Jim Himes, and I corrected myself, Hines, because written in my notes, right, I'm probably going to change it after the live stream before the recorded show goes live. But right now it says Jim Hines down in my notes. So my notes were wrong, but I remembered it right, but that messed me up. And then I also believe I called him a senator, but he's actually a representative from Connecticut. Although I think his answer was better than Mark. Maybe Trump should consider him to be vice president. I don't know. You can let me know what you think about Representative Jim Himes' correction of Shannon Bream and his explanation to her. And why didn't she bring up any of it? She was already, for the abortion discussion with Representative Himes there, had her Guttmacher numbers, which were kind of deceptive to begin with, all ready to go for that. Where was the hard-hitting cross-examination of Marco Rubio on abortion? I mean, she didn't really vet him. And I especially liked Representative Jim Himes' multiple references to Marco Rubio being over-caffeinated, having too much coffee, what was up with him? And I think that was actually pretty accurate, although it wasn't as funny as the clip from Senator John Fetterman. I remember I showed that early on, his reaction to well, here, I'll play it one more time before I get to the bonus Cheech and Chong clip. Here's John Fetterman talking about the magnificent interview he saw Margaret Brennan do of Governor Kristi Noem over here.
And we turn now to Pennsylvania Senator John Fetterman. He joins us from Orlando, Florida this morning, where he spent the weekend campaigning on behalf of President Biden's reelection. Welcome to the show, Senator.
Hi.
Hi.
Good to be here.
Great to have you here. You're cracking up. Do you want to tell us what you're responding to there?
Oh, that interview, that was magnificent. No,
Okay. Well, let me ask you.
Sorry, I just had to play that one more time. That's probably my favorite clip. But you can tell me what your favorite clip was, which of the 5 possible vice presidential candidates did the best, which anchor did the best doing the cross-examination of the 4 journalistic anchors, because we're not counting that Marco Rubio softball as a cross-examination. You can let me know all that in the comments section, also from the recorded show viewers. I hope you appreciate the time and effort I put into picking out the clips, adding my commentary and criticism. And before I go, I didn't have a live appearance from my cats that I adopted last December. They came from the shelter, named Cheech and Chong. They're 2 brothers. They're adolescent cats now, and Chong has a very loud purr. Cheech has a much softer, grunty purr. You're not going to hear Cheech purring here. They both come up to the camera, and as Chong comes up, you'll hear the loud purr over in this clip. So yeah, you got to hear Chong's purr pretty loud, and you could pretty much hear it through the whole clip. But anyway, that's the end of the program. I will be back next Monday and every Monday through January 2025, as I promised to do. I may have some reason to upload a video in between, but I kind of like doing the show this week. I don't like it every week, but this week was kind of fun putting it all together. I hope you enjoyed it, and let me know what you think. And if I don't have some other reason to upload a video, I guess I'll be back next Monday and seeing all of you around the internet.